Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to this online event, A New Promise of Work, What the Evidence Says About America's Workforce. I'm Brooke DeRenzis. I'm the CEO at National Skills Coalition, and we are co-hosting this event with my friend Elisabeth Jacobs and the Urban Institute's WorkRise. Welcome, Elisabeth.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Brooke and I have been talking for quite some time about this event, so I'm really excited to be able to kick it off with you, Brooke.
I am too. As you know, and I think some of the people who are probably joining know, we launched at National Skills Coalition earlier this year a new initiative called A New Promise of Work. And it's a national initiative that brings together workers and students and businesses and practitioners, bringing all of those folks together, right, around a bold new workforce vision and agenda, one where we can make sure that everyone has a fair shot at real economic opportunity. And we did this because, I feel, and I think many of our colleagues, and we hear this from the field, feel that in our conversations about workforce, we oftentimes focus on what's not working about today's public systems and where we can make small incremental changes to fix that. And that's an important conversation to have. But I've been thinking more and more, what if we instead also had the space to really imagine the future that working people and local businesses and communities actually want and need, and then to build policies toward that future. And that is what we're really setting out to do at National Skills Coalition with A New Promise of Work. We really want to reshape how our nation invests in pathways to valuable skills, good jobs, and shared prosperity. So we started these conversations with the field, with workers, local businesses, students, practitioners back at our Skills Summit in February. We're going to continue through a set of listening sessions and conversations in communities across the country this spring and this summer. But I'm really glad as we embark on reimagining our workforce policies that we don't have to start from scratch, right? We can actually look at what the evidence base is out there and what existing evidence tells us about what works to have the future that we want. And so, of course, Elisabeth, when I was thinking about this and we were launching this work, and I thought, who could tell us about what the existing evidence tells us about what's working? I immediately thought of Urban Institute and, in particular, WorkRise. So I'm really thrilled to have this conversation. And for folks who don't know National Skills Coalition, we are a national coalition of all of the broad-based stakeholders that I mentioned, working towards a national commitment for inclusive workforce policy so that workers can access a better life and businesses can see sustained growth. And our friends at WorkRise are really working to equip decision makers with trusted, accessible evidence to advance policies and practices that expand economic opportunity and security. And so that's where we want to start the conversation today. What is the evidence telling us about America's workforce and what's working as we try to build a new promise of work? So with that introduction, Elisabeth, I was hoping we could just start with a kind of general topic around what we're seeing and hearing in about the economy, right? The economy is a hot topic of conversation right now. It's always a big topic of conversation, but particularly right now. And I think one of the reasons is because polls are showing that Americans are feeling somewhat pessimistic about the economy right now. That pessimism, of course, is probably a sign of higher prices, right? We see grocery prices stay high. We're seeing gas prices increase. So it's certainly a sign of those higher prices. But I would also argue that it's also a sign of something deeper. People are concerned about what they can afford in life today, but they're also asking whether economic opportunity today and tomorrow for future generations, whether economic opportunity is still in reach. And I would guess that that question about whether economic opportunity is still in reach and the way people are feeling about that might be informing the pessimism that we are seeing in the economy. What do you think about my hypothesis there?
I think you're spot on, unsurprising. So we know that only about half of Americans without a college degree say the American dream is still possible, which to me says something pretty big about where we're at. We know only about a quarter of Americans think a college degree is worth the cost. Not great signs if you're thinking about a country that's really based on the idea of you work hard, you get an education, and you can actually succeed, not just have a stable life, but also move up the income and earnings ladder.
Mhm.
And Urban, I hope that many of you have seen our American Affordability Tracker. If you haven't and you work on these issues, please go check it out. It's full of great information. But just a top line, since 2017, average earnings have grown about 40% nationwide. Not bad. Not great, not bad. Home sale prices have risen by 77%. Rents have risen by 48%. And childcare prices have outpaced earnings as well. Anyone who has kids, I think, regardless of where you sit on the income spectrum, you have probably noticed that childcare is expensive. That's obviously an even bigger deal if you don't have a ton of money. So that really tells me that this is not just about how much things cost, it's also about whether jobs and what you earn from working has kept up with that. So one more little factoid from, again, the Urban Institute are we have a true cost of economic security index, which really measures how much are you earning, how much does it cost to actually live a stable life in a given place. And we find that 49% of people in American families don't have the resources to cover essential expenses just to live securely in their
Mm,
communities. That points to me to a problem that is about cost, but it's also about work and the promise of work and how much we're living up to it as a country.
right. And the things that you named, Elizabeth, a safe place to live, quality, affordable care for your children while you're working, the cost of education and training, all of those things are not just costs that are out on the marketplace, but really are things that I think people consider to be the building blocks of a good and stable life. And so, we know that that's part of why we need a new promise. If those things are not accessible to workers who are working hard to get ahead, we need a new promise. And we also know that some of the promises of work weren't fully delivered for everyone, right? And so in our conversation, there's certainly the part about bringing costs down, but there's also the part about increasing opportunity, increasing what's possible for people in their careers, and increasing the stability and job quality that comes with all of that. So I want to transition us first to what the evidence tells us about what actually works when we're increasing economic security and opportunity. And particularly when it comes to skills training, I don't think, as somebody who's been in this field for a long time, that it's uncommon to hear people point to a modestly funded federal program of some sort and say, look, it's only giving us really modest results. This doesn't work. Skills training doesn't work. Or, well, we're not really sure what works. We need lots more evidence about what's working. And more evidence and research is always a good thing. But as somebody who's worked in the field for a long time, I feel like we do have a sense of what works. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us, like, is that the case? Do we have a sense of what works? And what does the research tell us about what's effective when it comes to skills training?
Yeah. So I think we know a lot about what works. I'll asterisk that by saying that the labor market is changing really rapidly. We may not know all of what works in a world where, for example, AI really disrupts what we need to do and who we need to do it
Mm-hmm.
for. So I will caveat all of this with that. We never know exactly what works in all times and all places. But I'm going to give you my top five, what we know works that I think are pretty generally applicable, and many of which we are not doing and we're not doing at scale now. To your point about we know what works, but are we doing it and are we doing it for enough people and are we doing it right? So what works, number one? Training programs that are flexible and affordable. So designing programs around people's real lives, not what's convenient for the system, not what time school usually is or your training program usually is. So an example, Perscalis offers tuition-free accelerated tech training. They have a great graduation rate, a great share. 80% of their graduates find full-time employment in a year. And a big part of why is they structure their cohorts around people who are already working and make the timing work of the training. So
Mm-hmm.
that's number one. Number two, skills and credentials that employers actually recognize and value. You hear a lot about industry recognized credentials. There are good examples of that. Nursing and healthcare, CompTIA and IT, meaningfully improve time to hire, meaningfully improve job quality for completers. So when you have a certified graduate and the industry, the employer really recognizes, and not just one employer, but multiple employers in a given industry, see value in that. They understand this is someone who's learned the skills that I need for this job that I really need to fill. Those folks move through hiring pipelines faster and they find better matched jobs, which is a really kind of underappreciated, like labor economist term. Search and matching is essentially it means Does a worker find their best job and does an employer find the best person? You put those two things together and you get someone who can really thrive at work, and an employer gets someone who actually is really returning like the highest returns for the company, which is a total
Mm-hmm.
win-win. Um, I have a bunch more I could say about skills-based credentials, but I will move on because we have lots to talk about. Number three, real connections to employers and good jobs. So not just employer advisory boards, but employers who are really deeply involved with building a program. That means that workers need to be involved too. I can say more about what works very best is when you have employees, workers actually working with employers to identify, for example, here are the skills, the things I do on my job. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
employer, like you think you need more of this, we're going to work together to figure this out. But the main point here actually is about making sure that the training is tied to an employer, or even better, a whole sector with multiple employers that makes really clear that these are workers who are getting skills that are in demand. And they have employers who are committed to hiring them at the end of a process. We do a lot of work at Urban on registered apprenticeships, which is kind of a gold standard. There are other models. I would love for there to be more registered apprenticeships because there is so much research about how well they work compared to some other programs. But
Mm-hmm.
in general, a earn and learn program is connected to employer, and we see better outcomes there. That's number three. Number four, my favorite, wraparound supports. It is one of the biggest pieces of evidence, the biggest gap between evidence and practice is really making sure that, for example, transportation and childcare, those come up over and over and over again. They're still seen as kind of like a bonus, but we know that when you have those in place in a really durable way, they work. They remove financial strains. They allow people to actually show up consistently for training. It seems like a no-brainer, it really does to me. And yet they are not what we see consistently across programs. If we did, I think we'd see more. And then number five is equity-focused training, addressing not just skills gaps, but real structural barriers. If you look at aggregate completion rates, there are big differences under the hood in terms of how much people earn when they complete training. So Black and Latino adults earn about 10 to 20,000 less than white workers in comparable jobs. If you look at folks with shorter term credentials, they earn significantly less than men. So this is not all jobs, all training programs are created equal for each person in training. And then just a last point that these barriers are not just about skills or differences between skills. So one of my favorite kinds of studies as a researcher geek are audit studies when folks send out, this one is a resume-based study. So some researchers these are folks at the University of California, Berkeley, sent out resumes, 83,000 fictitious resumes to 11,000 job openings at the biggest companies in the country. All they varied on the resumes was the name, and they used the census to identify names that were more likely to be people who are Black versus people who are white. That was all they varied on the resume. And they found that employers were almost 10% less likely to contact the presumed worker who's Black as compared to a worker who they assumed or presumed white. So this is about discrimination happening before the very first dollar. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't just about training, which suggests to me the importance, I would say, of employers and workers being engaged in the training if you have a diversity of folks who are workers or would be workers, working with employers and then working over time, potentially in an apprenticeship and a learn to earn kind of model, that you're able to actually kind of stop some of that structural discrimination in the labor market before it starts. And that's really important for those top four to actually have equitable outcomes, which is something that obviously we know we need, right?
Yeah. Those five takeaways that you just shared, when they are put together, are exactly where we see, success for both working people, workers themselves, employers, and local communities in the field. So I appreciate you elevating those five themes and talking about how they can work together. I also appreciate you elevating the fact that we need to have structural solutions that include skills training, but that also are clear-eyed about some of the other challenges in the labor market. And you raised so much that we could have a whole separate conversation on. So I am just going to say plus one to that because I do want to talk about how skills training connects then to other opportunities, right? Because we know that when skills training creates more opportunities for working people, it's oftentimes all of the things you said, but as you said, connect it to solutions that can help boost the quality of jobs and also ensure that people are treated fairly. And I think in conversations that we have in the workforce space a lot, in the labor space a lot, we oftentimes treat skills training and job quality as separate challenges instead of seeing them as opportunities for really interconnected solutions. When I talk with workers and students who are in our network, and many of our students are in workforce training at community colleges, and so they're working and going to school for their jobs. When I talk to folks, they don't see those things as separate in their life, right? They want training and skills to get the kind of career they want, advance their career, shift their job, and they want those things, they want their jobs to be good jobs with good job quality. So I'm curious if you can tell us in our last conversation before we get to the awesome panel that's going to follow us, what does the evidence tell us about solutions to improving job quality, and how can those solutions work hand in hand with some of the solutions you were just talking about?
Yeah. So we don't have much time left, so we'll get to the solutions. But I just want to say, as I was getting ready for this conversation, I was looking through some research to just like, get myself as evidence-based as possible, not just with the top lines, but with some numbers. And one of the programs that we kind of celebrate, the Work Advance program, Celebrate is really successful, placed people had higher earnings over time. And one of the measures of success are the share of folks in the program who earned $40,000 a year by the end of year 7. And we see those in the skills world that's seen as real success. I took a step back and was like, wait, $40,000 a year, like that counts as success? $40,000 a year is like just above the federal poverty line for a family of 4. It's not a living wage in most cities. So I think this is like a reminder for all of us of just taking a step back and thinking about what is a job that is the good job that people are able to attain and stay in and ideally move up 7 years after leaving a training program that was seen as a big success. So what do we actually do about that? We'll point everyone once again to Urban has great research. In this case, it's just a framework for thinking about what is a quality job. It's not just a good wage, it's predictable income, it's benefits, it's stable and flexible scheduling. And I can say a little bit more about that in the context of skills and skills development. It's a safe workplace. It's a place where you feel dignity at work. Your dignity is recognized. It's free of discrimination and harassment, all those things that I hope everyone on this call experiences in their own job. That is what a good job is. So if you look at who has access to those, there are racial equity issues, obviously lower wage jobs, starting with the fact that they're low wage jobs, are not quality jobs in too many cases. So when I think about what we need to do, fair
Mhm.
scheduling is, I think, a pretty solid example. I know it is. We have a growing body of research. When you give people fair, it can mean predictable, it can mean stable, it can mean just give workers a little bit more control or say over when and how they work. That matters for outcomes, right? It's good for workers because you're able to show up at work because you're able to actually have your life fit with your job. That's good in terms of your earnings. It's predictable earnings. You're more likely to move up. You're healthier. Really important. It's good for employers too, and for 2 reasons in the context of training and mobility. One, you hold on to your workforce. It's really expensive. If anyone has actually hired, it's really time consuming. It's
Mhm.
really hard. It's really hard to find that best worker. So number one, it's retention, it's recruitment. It's people really want, especially younger workers, they want jobs that allow them to actually have this kind of space in their lives. Number two, it's good for training, right? If you're an employer who is a good employer who's put time into training your workforce, but then the job that they land in becomes very difficult for them to hold on to, you've lost your investment. You've invested in
Mhm.
a person, you've invested training and skills, and then they're gone because the job actually wasn't a job that allowed them to succeed. And that's not, it's a sort of undercutting your own ROI, right? Like, probably not a great idea. Um, so that's probably just because we're short on time. I'll give you that one as a really, really excellent example. I could keep talking for a long, long time about all of these things, but I will stop there. And if we have more time, I'll happily take it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I will note too some of the things that you listed in terms of the elements of job quality, right? That predictability that fits in with someone's life when it comes to schedule. Things like having agency and voice at work, and a fair environment. Things like having benefits that allow you to support a whole family while you're working. Many of those things are what makes quality training programs too, as you shared at the front end around flexible and affordable, around the supportive services. And so I see some real opportunities here to think about how we structure policies that support people while they're in training, but also in work from a design perspective. So thank you so much for
Thank
summarizing
you.
this. And I think now we are going to pass it off to my colleague, Melissa Johnson, who is the Chief of Policy and State Strategies at National Skills Coalition, to hear additional insights. So Melissa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Uh, as Brooke said, we are going to transition from that discussion about what the evidence says about building a more well-functioning workforce system to a discussion with some fantastic experts to explore some concrete strategies to simultaneously expand access to high-demand skills, improve job quality, and address the affordability pressures that so many are experiencing today. So I'm happy to be joined today by Rob Cherry, who's the CEO at Partner for Work, by Nicole Sherrard-Freeman, President and CEO of the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, and Janelle Jones, a Senior Fellow at the Century Foundation. And we are going to jump right into it with Janelle. Janelle, you recently joined the Century Foundation as part of a new class of visiting senior fellows who will help the foundation deepen its work on affordability. And you've led at the highest levels of federal government and national unions, and you also developed the Black Women Best framework. And that is the idea that an economy that works well for Black women who have historically faced the greatest exploitation and exclusion if we make the economy work for Black women, we will make the economy work for everyone. So as affordability pressures intensify for working families, what workforce-related policy solutions from that framework feel the most relevant to you right now?
Thanks for having me, and thanks for that question. A Black woman best ideology would lead to enacting deliberate strategies of inclusion to create a stronger economy so that our most marginalized can prosper. It requires focusing on those who are often left behind or completely left out of our policy solutions to ensure we don't have new policy with the same old patterns of exclusion. So I'll mention 4 workforce policies quickly that feel relevant to me right now. And shout out to my Century Foundation colleagues who've been doing some really, really good work in this space. So first is wage boards, particularly in industries where Black women are overrepresented. This will lead to increases in pay for low and middle income workers. And we see this working. In Nevada, they implemented a home care standards board, and pay for home care workers increased 40%. So second, and some of this will sound familiar because unsurprisingly, I agree with things Elisabeth Jacobs mentioned at the top. The second one is expanding high road training partnerships. This can lead to better and more intentional recruitment of Black women. And we can add in supports to ensure job growth is in the right places, meets the right workforce needs, and builds worker voice. And we see examples of this in California's Hospitality Training Academy. SEIU has a really good training partnership, and Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership, which works to recruit and retain workers in construction and manufacturing. And third, which addresses the job quality question, is around minimum staffing standards for critical care workforce. And we know this predominantly employs women of color. We've seen staffing standards improve safety, increase pay, reduce burnout, which is really still a concern for this workforce that has suffered extreme burnout since COVID. Rhode Island recently increased staffing levels, and they saw that workers saw pay increases, and employers were more able easily to recruit workers and provide upskilling. And then the last one I'll say, which is again was mentioned a little bit earlier, is around the non-degree credentials for developing talent. And this would include funding models that support tuition, fees, housing, childcare, transportation. And one model that, again, some Century Foundation colleagues have built out is Workforce Pell, which would expand the Pell Grant eligibility to short-term workforce programs. So I think that's my short list for workforce policy solutions right now.
I love that. And I love that you brought in examples from particular states. I'm going to um, bring Rob into the conversation because you have decades of experience delivering workforce services as part of a high-performing workforce board at Partner for Work in Pittsburgh. And I'm curious from your vantage point, what strategies have been successful in connecting workers to quality jobs that actually cover the cost of living?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Melissa, and thank you for having me today. And yeah, here at Partner for Work, we start with the employer, and we vet the employer for a few different things. One is wage, next is benefits, and the next is there an opportunity to grow or a career pathway in that particular company? And then we really move into what we call the matchmaking part of workforce development. And that's a two-way evaluation. And so one with the employer, it's incumbent upon us that we really build trust with the employer. And the way that we do that is we really make sure that we know their business, we know their supply chains, we know their workforce friction issues. And the same on the employee side or the job seeker side, we really find out what's important to them as far as having a quality job. And so we try to bring those things together, not in a way that, a particular employer would have a CNC job opening and we have 5 people with a CNC credential or certification, but really try to get granular in regards to what's important for both the employer and the job seeker. And a few different models that we have for doing that we found successful. One are pre-employment programs that are co-designed, or pre-apprenticeship programs that are co-designed with the employer itself. And getting that type of buy-in and co-creation is really important after you've vetted, wages, benefits, and other things. And so one successful program that we had here was on the building of the airport terminal project, where we brought pre-apprenticeship programs to the work site of the terminal. We had the unions, the contractors, everyone engaged, the training providers engaged, and it created an atmosphere where the participants of the program were engaged with all of the partners and the co-creators in the program. And that led to a really good story that we had in this particular program where there was an individual who was clearing lots for another site for one of the construction partners. Because the construction partner was a co-creator in the program, he engaged this person who had, been cleaning out lots daily, working in, all different types of conditions, but this individual was going home and his paycheck was not adding up to his bills. He got him enrolled in our pre-apprenticeship program with our partners, and that person, 18 months later, was with the operators union and buying his first house. And so when all those things can come together, and this is one of those perfect scenarios, when your employers and other co-creators are champions of that co-creation, they can really, they become your recruiters also. And so that's where we've found success in really building programs and models where after we have vetted kind of that first tier of criteria, we're bringing those individuals and programs and partners together really works well for job seekers.
Thank you, Rob. I'm sensing some themes here in terms of what Janelle brought up in terms of working with employers through sector partnerships, and what you said about partnering with employers as well. I want to bring Nicole into the conversation as well. You are, as I said, currently the president and CEO of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. But before that, you've worked in different workforce spaces for years, including with the city of Detroit. And cities are on the front lines, kind of like workforce boards are on the front lines of very two interconnected challenges right now. Workers who can't find jobs to pay enough to afford the cost of living, and local economies who can't grow without a stable, thriving workforce. Two-parter for you. What levers do cities have to actually move both of those needles, and what does it look like when they use those levers really well?
Well, thanks so much for having me, and thank you for the question. Excuse me. And the first thing I have to do here is double down on what Rob Cherry just said. So in Detroit, when I led the workforce board, when I led the workforce agency, quasi-public workforce agency for the city, I got to tell you, the number one way we were successful and the way in which we had the most success for the greatest amount of people is in the way that Rob just described. So, and they weren't sector partnerships necessarily. We tried the sector partnership model. We tried it in healthcare, retail, hospitality, and entertainment. We tried it in manufacturing, and sometimes those models were more successful than others. But I will tell you what worked 100% of the time. And that is the model that Rob just described, a one-to-one relationship between large employers and a group of dedicated recruitment and attraction specialists, business development specialists on my staff for Fiat Chrysler Automotive when they built their first auto plant inside a city in 40 years. We helped them hire 8,800 people for production operator jobs. 8,800 people over a course of about 3 years. We also did it for Amazon. Amazon hired more than 1,200. I mean, I could go on and on. But the point is, we did what Rob described, which was we got in the room with Fiat Chrysler Automotive, now Stellantis, early, and we talked with them about their greatest challenges. We built a relationship where we understood not just their challenges, but their core business model. I mean, we were partners in solutioning for the problems that kept Stellantis at the time from hiring people. And the number one thing that got employees, or top two reasons that employees were released during a probation period. And it took us 18 months to build that partnership. Fortunately, they were also building an auto plant, so 18 months was just fine. But those kinds of one-on-one partnerships, while they are certainly more, certainly more expensive in terms of the time that you've got to invest and the time that the employer has to invest, the relationship that you build and what nets out of it is for us, at least, it was always worth the cost. Aside from those frontline examples, though, I will share briefly 4 ways that the city of Detroit has, as you asked, Melissa, like what are the tools and levers that a city has? We tied tax incentives at the local level and the state level to wages. We created structures where if you gave Detroiters first priority in applying for a job, we baked that into the deal. You didn't have to hire the Detroiter. We just wanted you to give the Detroiter the first shot. Whether or not the Detroiter got hired is up, it's up to the employer and the person being interviewed. We use paid training models, as both Elisabeth and Melissa and you and Brooke have talked about, where we recognize the tension that existed between, you've got a person working 2-3 jobs part-time already, talking to them about going into a training program, like there's just a fundamental economic, like the math doesn't work, right? Unless they're paid to do that. So we figured out ways to fund models so that they weren't making a living wage, but they were making minimum wage, which allowed them some degree of flexibility to engage in training programs that led then directly to a real job. We used earn to learn models, so we paid people to complete their high school diploma or GED, and then quite frankly, Detroit has a brand new mayor, just elected in November of last year, started in January, Mayor Mary Sheffield. And she just created a living wage standard for all City of Detroit employees. I think it's 8,000 employees, so no one will be paid less than, I think it's $44,000 a year. I'm slightly underplaying that in case someone quotes me. But she is, in fact, modeling what we're asking of other employers.
Thank you for that. Once again, love the very concrete examples. I'm going to stay with you, Nicole, for a bit, because like I said, you've had different experience in different workforce spaces. And like we were just talking about, you were a public official working with workforce practitioners and businesses to advance local economic development. And now you are a philanthropic leader. So from your vantage point, what do government, business, and philanthropy each bring to the table when it comes to helping workers access good jobs and afford to live?
Yeah, I appreciate that very tough question. If only we had clean and clear answers to that, right? I have to start though with employers. And I have to start with employers in this environment, particularly because I don't know, every week that we pick up a news publication, we're watching in very real time the economic pressures that employers are under, and they are going to make decisions. They always make decisions. They don't tolerate uncertainty well, and so they're going to be conservative. My prediction is they'll be conservative, if not more than conservative, on hiring. We're already starting to see the fallout of greater adoptions of artificial intelligence and automation and the effect that's having on their hiring plans. And so what business always brings to the table is, whether we like it or not, the reality of the economic moment that we're in. And it is my personal and professional opinion that when we don't anchor ourselves in that economic reality, we unwittingly further contribute to the very problems that we are trying to solve. So business brings the real perspective on what they're going to be willing to do, what they're able to do, and ultimately they're the partnership we have to have for any of this to work. Government brings the economic case around, like, what it takes to attract and retain businesses in a city and what it takes to run a city. And the what it takes to run a city question is important because there are, lots of well-intended policymakers who would love to pull the city into more responsibility than the city can afford to bear, for closing the gap between what an employer is willing to do and what a worker needs. So, if you have to start with the realities of the city as well, and who else the city is competing with, right? A city is competing with other cities in any geographic region. A state is competing with other states in a geographic region to attract business. And so you have to take those factors into consideration, because business can choose to locate wherever business wants to locate, and they're going to locate wherever it makes the most economic sense. So cities bring the reality as well of what it takes to be able to effectively use tools that a city has. And for philanthropy is uniquely positioned to bring people into the conversation, get people around the table, and really explore and press into, what problem are we trying to solve here? What assets do we have? What are we limited by? It's really, I think I'm finding that philanthropy is uniquely positioned to get to that question of, let's have a real conversation about the things that we care about, what's important to each of us, and try to balance those things out in a way that is respectful of what everybody needs.
Awesome. Thank you. You handle that tough question like a pro. The I'm going to bring Janelle back into the conversation, and next question will be question for all of you all. You all have extensive experience in this space. We could probably talk all day about these issues. I'm curious from all of you, what feels different about this affordability crisis moment? Does this moment require different solutions for workers than have been proposed in the past? Does it require doubling or tripling down on what we know works, kind of harkening back to the previous conversation, or a combination of both?
Yeah, I'm starting. Yes.
Yes, you are
Yeah.
starting.
Okay. That's what I thought. I think a combination of both. I mean, we are living this moment, so it feels urgent and overwhelming and sometimes impossible. You know, we have overlapping crises: climate, work, technology, democracy, racism, sexism. So I don't think we have the privilege of not thinking of new solutions, but we also know some things that work, and we, have mentioned quite a good list here today that we just haven't done with the right implementation model, that we haven't done for all workers, that we haven't done with enough investment. And so, in that bucket, I would put kind of the unions, worker voice, those things matter and definitely need to be doubled down on. And then on new solutions, I think we have an opportunity with AI to decide it can be a solution and not just a problem to be overcome. I really like Nicole's framing about business deciding how it's going to handle uncertainty and government deciding how to close the gap between what business is willing to do and what a worker needs. And I think that's an equation that seems to be a little off balance as of late, particularly at the federal level where I focus. It's not inevitable that AI replaces every worker. Like every tool, it is people who have the power to decide how it's used, for whom, how the profits of that technology are shared. And so, I think something I've been saying for years, we are the people that make up this economy and how it serves the workers in it. And so, yeah, I think there's a need for the old, maybe with some tweaks, which again, we've listed a bunch here today, and then also the new to kind of meet this particular moment that does feel pretty urgent.
I love that, especially the AI as a solution piece. Rob, you want to go next?
Yeah, I can't agree more with Janelle in that AI is a solution piece also. But I think it's both. I think we have to double down on, co-creation with employers, sector partnerships, supportive services, all of those things um, to really help see us through. And I think that there's also a different education and advocacy track that we have to go on around affordability also, and really sitting down with employers and saying, hey, at this current wage, this is the caption of people who value this as a job, and almost create competitiveness with employers through that. As opposed to saying, you don't pay enough or this job isn't a great job. I think employers are very competitive, and they're competitive for talent right now. And we have to do a better job of like letting them know what their wage buys for their employees, and also letting them know that, for the same job somewhere close by, this is what is buying somewhere else. And you'll lose your talent to this particular business down the street if you don't become competitive. And so I think at the same, we have to, advocate with legislators and educate them on what's affordable right now also, because things are changing so fast. We had this conversation 5, 6 years ago. We wouldn't be talking with the same numbers, and those numbers seem to be rapidly changing right now. And so as much of this data as we can get in front of employers, legislators, elected officials, the better that we all have a baseline understanding right now about what's affordable for job seekers, employees, and the citizens or their constituents.
I love that competitiveness framing. Nicole?
Yeah, so it's really hard to follow Janelle and Rob, right? Because I'm not sure what there is to be said that they haven't already covered. I will tell you what feels different for me in this moment. So it feels like we've had this breakthrough nationally in the conversation about affordability. Everyone is talking about affordability everywhere. It affects everyone. And I think that's a moment we ought to capitalize on, because what I find, having been in the corporate sector and government and philanthropy, is that we are sometimes talking past each other. Sometimes we care about similar things, sometimes we care about the same things, but our language is so different that oftentimes we can't hear each other. and we sometimes talk about issues and opportunities and concerns and potential solutions in our own language and not the language of the person that we're talking to, and so they never hear us, right? So it feels like this moment is different in that because affordability is such a crisis across the nation for everybody, we might take this moment and figure out how do we talk about this differently so that everybody sees their opportunity. I got to tell you, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that businesses make decisions based on what the right thing to do is. There was a time in my life when I think that was more true, and I'd like to believe that in some places it's still true. But the truth is, for me, at least in our part of the world, if you're not talking economics, people aren't listening. And so we've got to figure out how to do a better job of that. And I think we're at a pivotal point in this nation where we might be able to figure that out.
Mhm. I am going to try to squeeze in one last question because you all are dropping such good gems of knowledge. I'm glad this is being recorded because I'm going to go back and listen to it myself. Um, we have in the room today people from all across the country who tuned in to hear more about what we can do to build a better system for workers that improves access to high demand skills, improves job quality, all while addressing affordability pressures. If there is one thing from our conversation today that you just want to underscore and you hope that people carry forward from this conversation, what would that be? And I'm going to start with Rob this time.
Yeah, I would say one, start with the job first. And I think second is something that I heard someone say, is that, job quality and um, what the worker experiences are not two separate things because they get one paycheck, and what they need that paycheck to do is pay their bills and make sure that they have a life where they can support themselves and their family. And so these are not two separate issues. They're the same issues, and we should all look at it as one.
And Nicole and Janelle will close us out.
Sure. I'll add to Rob's point with this. Keep talking to people who are outside of your line of business. If you're a workforce development think tank, nonprofit leader, or practitioner, keep talking to people who are not in that network. Figure out which problems they are trying to solve and where you might have common ground. Don't try to convince them of your view of the world and your opinion on what we need to do. Listen to theirs.
Great.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I'll
Janelle?
go. I love all of that. I think the economist in me is always very doom and gloom, but I think one takeaway is that while we're in this place that seems really hard, there are policies and places where people are truly caring for each other. There are policymakers at the state and local level who are not following the economic direction of the federal government. And I think that matters. It matters for people's lived experience in those places. It matters as we track what works when we think about solutions. And I think it matters to, help give us some hope in these particularly turbulent, and I hate to say it, like unprecedented times.
Mhm. And that is a great way for us to end this conversation. I'm so thankful, beyond thankful to each of you all as panelists for joining this conversation, for answering some really tough questions on a Monday. I'm thankful for all of our registrants, everybody who joined us today, and I hope that we've delivered on that promise to really talk about concrete strategies that are addressing all of these challenges at the same time. I hope that you will continue following the work of Urban Institute's WorkRise, the National Skills Coalition, of all of our panelists, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your Monday. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks all.
Thank you.